To order, this is meeting number 43 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Welcome to all of the committee members and to our witnesses. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, May 5th, 2026, the committee is resuming its study of international trade-related activities of certain federal entities. We have with us today from the Business Development Bank of Canada, Véronique Dorval, Chief Operating Officer, Executive Vice President, Pierre Giroux, Vice President, Research and Chief Economist by video conference, Export Development Canada, Todd Winderholt, Senior Vice President, International Markets and Head of Communications and Public Affairs, and Joanne DeFranco, Vice President, Global Business Development. I'll remind the witnesses to have your earpieces on. You'll have questions in both English and French. If you need interpretation, please ensure you know how to, and I know you're very well equipped for all of this. Welcome again to all of you. We'll have opening remarks. Ms. Dorval, I invite you to do opening remarks for up to 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, ainsi qu'aux membres.
Thank you, Chair, committee members, for inviting me to appear today to speak about the BDC. BDC is the only bank exclusively dedicated to Canadian entrepreneurs, and its mission is to support them by providing financing, advisory services, and venture capital.
On commercial principles, supporting over 107,000 clients across the country, of which about 7% export. As outlined in the BDC Act, we are focused on the domestic market, with the export-enabling role for businesses well served by sister crowns such as EDC. Our view is that BDC's role in helping create, grow, and scale SMEs create the ideal preconditions for exporting companies. Small and medium-sized enterprises are the backbone of the Canadian economy. They represent 99.7% of all businesses and account for 64% of private sector employment. C'est pourquoi BDC est...
That is why BDC has a presence across the country with 109 business centers. Thanks to this Canada-wide presence, our portfolio stood at $57.2 billion in loans and investments as of fiscal year 2025. This work generates tangible economic benefits for Canada. Based on fiscal year 2025, BDC estimates that its activities will contribute $25 billion to Canada's GDP over the next 5 years.
We are equally committed to delivering value to our shareholder, the Government of Canada, by operating as well-managed Crown Corporation. BDC operates on commercial principles, remains profitable, and fully funds its core operation. This ensures that we do not rely on taxpayer funding. In fact, our profitability has allowed us to return dividends back to Canadians. Over the past 5 years, BDC has paid $1.4 billion to the Government of Canada. En matière de commerce international,
in the area of international trade, BDC makes a meaningful contribution to the broader efforts to support businesses facing tariffs and ongoing uncertainty. Through our core business, we provide working capital to help companies continue to grow while protecting their liquidity. We also offer advisory services to strengthen their strategy, operations, and competitiveness.
I'm joined today by Chief Economist Pierre Giroux, whose team has delivered over 280 presentations across the country since the tariffs were introduced. In addition to producing a number of accessible research and tools that support entrepreneurs to inform them and inform their business decision. We also play a key role within the Government of Canada broader tariff response, delivering a number of tariff relief programs with flexible financing and advisory services to help businesses adapt and continue to grow. This includes about $200 million in loans and close to 600 advisory mandates delivered under the Pivot to Grow program for smaller business directly affected by U.S. tariff or the uncertainty. For softwood lumber businesses, BDC has guaranteed over $300 million in loans and letter of credit through partner financial institutions. Plus récemment, BDC a
More recently, BDC was tasked with implementing a $1 billion funding package for companies in the steel and aluminum sectors to help viable businesses remain operational and resilient. Madam Chair, BDC remains firmly committed to supporting Canadian entrepreneurs during this period of uncertainty while continuing to operate on a financially sustainable basis and deliver value to Canadians. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Mr. Bell, on to Mr. Winterholt and Ms. DeFranco, please, for opening remarks of up to 5 minutes.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for inviting me today.
Aujourd'hui,
I have with me Joanne DeFranco, VP of Business Development for International Markets.
pleased to be back at the International Trade Committee and looks forward to contributing to the committee's study on key challenges, opportunities, and support tools available to Canadian exporters as they navigate a challenging and evolving trade landscape. Si vous le permettez, j'aimerais.
If I may, I'd like to summarize EDC's mandate for those who are less familiar with us. We are part of Canada's international trade ecosystem, and our mission is to support and grow Canada's international trade.
We support Canadian companies with insurance, direct lending, and working capital to help them manage risk, find new buyers, participate in large projects, or to establish operations overseas. Leveraging our 26 international representations around the world, we offer market insights and connections to help exporters find new trading partners. Together, this helps exporters and investors lower risk and access the capital they need to enter new markets. In 2025, EDC served approximately 24,000 Canadian exporters, facilitating over $135 billion in exports, foreign investment, and trade development. EDC's business supported an estimated $97 billion of Canada's gross domestic product, or more than 3% of total Canadian GDP. It also supported approximately 580,000 full-time jobs across the country. Like our colleagues at BDC, we operate on commercial terms, which ensures that our work complements that of private commercial banks and insurers. Consistent with this model, EDC does not provide grants or subsidies. At our core, we are a customer needs-driven organization, and in 2026, Canadian exporters and investors are very clearly telling us that they are looking to diversify. In fact, our 2025 Trade Confidence Index survey found that over 65% of Canadian companies were planning to diversify their markets and into new regions within the next 2 years. This is a continuation of an upwards trend towards diversification that started in earnest following the end of the pandemic. Furthermore, over the past 10 years, EDC research has found that the export pathway for Canadian companies has fundamentally shifted. The share of Canadian companies that start out exporting to the U.S. only has declined by nearly half. Over the same period, the share of companies that start out exporting to multiple global markets has more than tripled. The U.S. remains, in our view, will always be Canada's most important market, with nearly 3/4 of exporters being either highly or moderately dependent on it. But the imperative to diversify now, in this transformational moment for global trade, is exceptionally strong. Working with our diverse group of buyers in multiple markets has long been known to boost an exporter's performance and prosperity. Today, it has become an imperative. The Canadian trade ecosystem has begun to galvanize around this purpose, and now we need to execute. The performance highlights I shared earlier underscore EDC's propensity for impact. Our primary focus is to help Canada become a more resilient, competitive, and secure trading nation. EDC is proud to serve as a catalyst for growth in Canada's most promising and future-oriented sectors like critical minerals, energy and energy transition, agri-food, and defense and security. We can leverage our extensive and growing international presence to grow Canadian business in high-potential markets like Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. And finally, with our project finance team, one of the largest and most experienced in all of Canada, we can help support the domestic infrastructure build that supports trade and productivity enhancements here at home and facilitates diversification at the necessary scale. Je vous remercie de m'avoir accordé.
Thank you for giving me the time to share some information on EDC and international trade.
We look forward to offering you some more information and addressing your questions. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. You'll now open the floor for questions. Mr. Mantle for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing, providing their valuable testimony. Mr. Vell, you mentioned the Pivot to Grow Pivot to Grow loan program. I understand there are several other programs that BDC operates with respect to, if I could generally call it, tariff relief or mitigation, the forestry support program, steel and aluminum program, small business loan, business purchase or transfer loan program, working capital loan program, and the softwood lumber and guarantee program. Have I captured all of them?
Some of the. So we have the Pivot to Grow program, softwood lumber guarantee, lift, steel and aluminum, and forestry. Yep.
Those would be of the programs. Those are the ones that are targeted at mitigation.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
That is right.
The committee is obviously very interested in the programs that the government is operating to help mitigate some of the effects of tariffs on Canadian companies. Would you undertake to provide the committee a list of the companies that you have taken advantage of those programs and the amount of contributions they've received?
I can give you here numbers of how many companies have taken advantage of the program. I don't have all the name of the company available, but if it's helpful. Pivot to Grow is a program that focuses at helping entrepreneurs that are affected by either the tariff or the economic uncertainty. It has an envelope of $500 million. For now, a little bit more than $200 million have been deployed across 157 loans and more than 600 advisory mandate, because there's an important component here that is beyond financing, just helping entrepreneurs define their strategy of how do they adapt to the environment.
That makes sense. Could you maybe, in the interest of time, could you submit in written form to the committee some of that information on the size of the program and in particular the names of the companies that have taken advantage of that?
So we can provide more detail on those programs, absolutely, in writing form.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I appreciate that. I'd like to ask you a little bit about some of the economic analysis that BDC undertakes. I know you do your monthly economic letter, is sort of forecasting what the economy looks like. So could you tell me, my understanding of a recession is 2 quarters of negative or stagnant growth. Is that correct?
I'm going to let Pierre, our chief economist, answer a question about that.
Thank you. Actually, Madam Chair, the definition of a recession is quite complex, and in Canada, CDAO is the organization that will make a decision, I would say, if Canada is in a recession or not. So the 2 quarters in a row refer to what the media is called a technical recession, but this doesn't mean that it's a formal recession.
Could you define for me the difference between formal recession and technical recession?
A technical recession is, like you said, it's 2 quarters in a row of negative growth. But to have a recession, and like I said, in Canada, CDAO is the organization that is responsible to decide if we are in recession or not. You require basically a deeper decline in economic growth, and also more job layoff. So these are different components that will make the decision of a recession for any country.
Thank you. Is a technical recession a good thing for a country to be in? Is it an indicator of a strong economy, a technical recession?
Well, a technical recession means that the GDP declined 2 quarters in a row. So that's really the definition of a technical recession.
Thank you. In my last minute and a bit, in your economic update, you talk about residential investment weighing on growth. One thing the letter doesn't refer to is the non-residential investment, and I wanted to get your views on that, because non-residential investment is critical for productivity, as I understand it. And CD Howe has recently, I guess in March, put out their analysis that we're 25% below the 2014 peak of non-residential investment. And so productivity investment in machinery, plants, and equipment is below the replacement rate. Is that BDC's view as well, that productivity-related investment is below our peak and declining?
Well, in 2025, non-residential investment had zero growth for the year. And this is really related to the fact that there was a lot of uncertainty in the economy. So businesses have been very cautious about investing more. If we didn't have an increase in business investment in 2025, we can conclude that the investment in terms of productivity, it's probably slowing down.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lavoie, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à nos témoins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us. We're happy to have you with us. Our study is an important one. It was a motion that I tabled because I wanted to be able to speak with you. You both play an essential role in banks and for trade, and I've seen projects see the light of day thanks to your businesses. As my colleagues know, we've heard foresight and all businesses are talking about it. But things have changed. Many experts came to see us. International experts have said to us that things are going to stay unpredictable for a while. And given this instability and how it's going to last a long time, we're going to have to make some adjustments, whether it be with banks or with you. And in the annual report for EDC, I'm going to read a sentence. We heard it many times, but it does summarize things well. The evolution of international trade and nationalism are on the rise, and we see your strategic priorities. Same thing for BDC, redefining a project that can be funded. You compared things between 2020 and 2025. So we see that you are very aware of changes. And my question is for both groups of witnesses. There's a before and an after. For the BDC between 2020 and 2025, you made changes, and we saw the trend between 2020 and 2025 with the small businesses. But what I would like to know is, given the changes that we have faced in the last year and a half, what are you implementing as of now that is different from what you were doing before in order to overcome these changes that are likely going to be permanent? If you don't have the answers today, that's fine. You could send them in writing after the meeting. But let's look at what's concrete. I say that because we heard from the Association of Bankers, and on a similar question, they were 50,000 feet up in the air. They were really too far from the question. So we know that you understand small businesses, and so what are the actions that you are implementing or that you will be implementing in order to assist our businesses to diversify and export, to go in different sectors, for BDC, funding sectors that were not previously being funded, defense, for example. Perhaps we can have very fruitful discussions today on how you're going to help these businesses, and your two complementary organizations for supporting these businesses. So I'll let whoever wishes to start speak. Ms. Dorval, I can start. I would start by saying that we are aware that we are dealing with structural changes and not only temporary changes. In the last year and a half, we've had to adapt very quickly to the changes. A lot of programs that we were talking about today were launched in a few weeks, and even we needed to take a few days to adapt because entrepreneurs also need to adapt quickly. Given that context, we believe that our basic offer is relevant, but we need to offer additional support to those sectors that are impacted while investing in things that are going to help businesses. For example, a program for investing in productivity. Our businesses need to invest in AI, in robotics, automation, and we want to support them and offer support and advisory services. So that's one example of structural support to help with productivity. You also mentioned supporting strategic sectors. Defense is one of those sectors. We will be deploying over $6 billion over the coming years in order to support this sector that's essential to our economic sovereignty and our security. We are currently reviewing our strategy, and we will be doing that over the coming months in order to identify other strategic industries that we would like to invest in further. Productivity will continue to be essential. A third thing is business transition. There are a lot of business leaders who want to sell their business, and it's an opportunity to create value. We know that this is a pivotal moment that can either reduce value or increase it, because we can increase the productivity of businesses. Thank you, Ms. Dorval. I know that my time is up, but I'll have another turn, and I will give the floor to EDC to respond at that time.
Mr. Simard, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Dorval, regarding the conflict on softwood lumber that started in 2017, to my knowledge, from 2017 to 2025, 2026, there was no support for the forestry industry. At BDC, there was a program, rather there was no program before 2025. Is that the same for EDC, for the forestry sector from 2007?
This to support the forestry sector from...
De 2017 à 2025?
Yes, sir.
Est-ce que ce serait possible pour vous de...
Would it be possible to share the type of support offered by province from 2017 to 2025?
The committee with that.
Merci. Je vous dis ça, 2025, c'est...
2025, there was a government announcement regarding a liquidity access program for the forestry sector. If I remember the announcement, it was made in August 2025. There was a briefing session from your organization, end of November, end of October, I believe. There was a presentation. And then in January, February, businesses were still calling me to say that they didn't have access to anything or it was very difficult. And I'm not criticizing you, but I would like to know, and without naming any businesses if that's not possible, but can you tell us, and specifically for Quebec, and you could potentially speak to other provinces, but when did businesses start receiving this additional liquidity? My colleague had asked a similar question earlier. You talked about $300 million in loans, which has been offered up until today. So if you could give us that information, perhaps in writing, when that started, and give us information by province, that would be very interesting. Do you have an idea when the funding was given? The program was officially launched on October 15th, 2025. So that's the official date for the launch. I don't have the date for the first loan going out. Again, we have over $300 million that was for Canada in guaranteed loans and loans. Some were direct, some went through financial institutions, and we could send in writing the information by province, not only for the program, but through our regular service offerings as well. We've always supported the sector, and so we could send that information in as well. You have always helped the sector? Well, in our regular offer, they're beyond special programs. What did you have from 2017 to now for the forestry sector? Could you share that information with us as well? Yes. I believe it was Ms. Hudon who talked about these guaranteed loans that applied to those who were doing trade with the United States. There was a logic there, but the forestry sector, and if you have a sawmill of under a certain size, 300 cubic meters, well then your market would be considered national, but you wouldn't necessarily be exporting. But in the last few years, larger players exited the American market and started selling more and more in the Canadian market, so they are competing with these smaller players. But the smaller players don't have access to those liquidity programs, and I'm wondering if that's still the case. I talked about this to the minister, and they said that there could be a reform. So does the program still only apply to businesses doing business with the United States? No, that's not the case. That was a great question. Last week, we announced expanding the program. So regarding the guaranteed loans, the maximum amount went from 30 to 50 million. And now we have a program that covers the value chain. It includes transport, processing, and we can support even smaller businesses that are not directly impacted by tariffs, but the supply chain is impacted. So, unfortunately, there are the small forestry businesses that are being forgotten. So whether it is sawmills or paper mills, processing, the forestry sector is a whole chain, and if you remove a link, everything falls apart. Have you offered support to small forestry businesses? We could give you information on that program that was expanded, but yes, the program that we have for the forestry industry allows us to support small businesses that are focused on harvest and transportation. Access to liquidity. There are two parts of the program. Access to liquidity that can go up to $50 million, so $1 million to $50 million. And there's a processing program as well. We want to support entrepreneurs who want to improve their productivity. We can offer up to $25 million in support.
To your next round. Mr. Chambers, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pleasure to be here. interesting room. I can't help but feel a little bit of sympathy for staff who don't have as much room. And of course, since the government members have added a few extra folks, we've got more staff in the room, but not enough room for everybody. Well, no, behind us. In any event,
We've been able to
we've had
find
great rooms
space
up
in the
until now,
West
but
Block.
next time I think we'll be in a better one. Mr. Winterholt, you mentioned that you deal with a lot of firms who have primary businesses in the U.S. Our understanding from testimony at this committee from auto manufacturers and also some other proprietors is that access to the U.S. market is crucial to attracting investment or other business activity from either international firms or convincing Canadians to grow, Canadian firms to grow. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, as I mentioned, we would certainly agree with that. And maybe I would add that the greatest growth we've seen in 2026 is in the growth of Canadian exporters to the U.S. market to ensure their access to that market, but also deeper business relationships here in Canada.
Okay, so in your view, obviously a successful negotiation for the Canada Free Trade Agreement with the U.S. is essential for the health of the businesses that you serve?
We would say, as our largest partner today and likely for the foreseeable future, a strong relationship with the United States is in everyone's best interest.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Cleroux, maybe I'll take some opportunity or the benefit of having a technical economist at committee. My understanding is that the average, even with the sectoral tariffs imposed by the U.S., I think the government uses an average tariff rate of Canadian goods into the U.S. of about, I don't know, 3%, give or take a little bit. Do I have that right from your understanding?
Yes. Yes, that's the right number.
Okay. That is an average, my understanding, that's also an average arrived because 85% of the goods from Canada currently go into the U.S. tariff-free, but there are some punishing sectoral tariffs, but that brings the average down. Is that the way that you get to the average number?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. What I have a hard time understanding, but maybe you can just help me understand, if the average effective rate of the tariffs is 3%, and if CUSMA was to go away totally, I understand that there would be an average effective rate of around 1.8 or maybe 2%, because you would go back to what it was like without a free trade deal. Why is no economist or any external actor considering a scenario where you would just pay an average effective tax rate across the board on every good going into the U.S. of 1 or 2%? I've never seen anyone talk about that as a potential option. Is there a reason? Do I just have, am I wrong in thinking that that's maybe an option?
Well, I think there's a lot of options on the table, but most of the analysis have been made on what is the impact of the current tariff imposed on the different sectors of the Canadian economy. So most of the economic analysis have been focusing on that.
Understood, but if the U.S. is going back to call it a pre-1900 economic and taxation plan where they will impose tariffs on goods coming in, would it not make sense to spread the pain across the entire economy of 1% or 2%? Is that? I'm just trying to understand why no one is talking about this potential in order to get out of the very soul-crushing, devastating sectoral tariffs that the U.S. has imposed on specific sectors.
Well, there's, like we said, there's a lot of different options. So we have focused our analysis so far on the current tariff imposed by the U.S. There's a number of them that is affecting different sectors. So that's at BDC, we have been doing a lot of analysis to better understand what is the impact on Canadian businesses for those tariffs. We haven't looked much of other options because there's so many of them. So we have been really focusing on the impact of the current tariff imposed.
Okay, if I could leave you with a suggestion, if you haven't considered some of these other options, you might want to consider what the impacts to the entire economy would be if there was a base tariff rate of 1 or 2% on all of the goods going into the U.S. and maybe what that might do to currency, and whether that is a better scenario than the one we're currently in.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chambers. We'll move on to Ms. Akan, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. BDC launched its defense platform in December and has since expanded it from $4 billion to $6 billion, signaling strong early demand. This first strong North Fund investments announced last month and focus on areas such as quantum computing and cybersecurity. So, Mr. Clairaut, what is this early demand revealing about where Canada's dual-use capabilities are emerging, and how can high-potential firms position themselves to access and benefit from this platform?
Well, actually, I think this is a better question for my colleague Véronique. Maybe I can complement after that. But Véronique, do you want to answer to the demand we had so far?
So I think you are right to mention that those two areas are important in area from a VC perspective, some from an equity perspective. We're seeing also on the financing and on the advisory side, more broad-based manufacturing companies that are already involved in the sector. We see, for example, drone, uncrewed vehicles for land, for marine, where there's quite a bit of demand. So we see a lot of opportunity for SMEs to be able to contribute and benefit from the growth in the sector.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dorval. So last month, the government also announced a $1 billion BDC initiative to support businesses across the steel, aluminum, and copper value chain. At a recent roundtable in my riding of Oakville West, I met with the business owners, and the Oakville Chamber of Commerce indicated that while members are encouraged by the announcement, many are seeking more detailed information on that. Can you provide an update on the current status of this program and how BDC is ensuring that relevant information is being effectively communicated to businesses across the value chain?
Yeah. So the steel and aluminum program was launched 5 weeks ago. So it's still a relatively recent program. In that sector, we have had more than 120 conversations for now with specific entrepreneurs where we are looking at assessing if they are eligible, how would they fit with that program or other programs that we are offering. For now, we have 2 loans that have been accepted by entrepreneurs after only 5 weeks. And we have engaged not only with our direct client, with other clients in the sectors, but also through association to make sure that the program is known and those associations can talk and relay the information to their members.
Thank you. Mr. Winterhout, EDC's 2026 global export forecast highlights that the energy sector accounted for roughly about 20% of Canadian exports in 2025, with projected growth of 10% by 2026. Nuclear is clearly part of that story, and CANDU technology is the Canadian-owned, supported by domestic supply chain, and fueled by Canadian uranium, with active efforts underway to expand exports. How does EDC structure its financing and risk support for nuclear technology exports, and how does Canada's overall offering compare in competitiveness to financing packages provided by countries such as Korea, China, Russia, and United States?
Thank you very much for the question. And energy remains one of Canada's greatest strengths in terms of export potential. You're absolutely right. Nuclear plays an important part in that conversation, both in terms of baseload nuclear supply, as through the CANDU program, but also more and more, I think, in the future through SMR, small modular reactor technology, which we know Canada is leading on in the G7. EDC is open for support in both those areas and has significant experience, in particular on the CANDU side of the equation, and in past have supported transactions in Romania, for example, with the Cernavoda reactors, and are engaged in kind of refurbishment of those, supporting the Canadian nuclear industry and value chain, not just the OEM in this space. In addition, there are a number of other live conversations in multiple jurisdictions around the globe that EDC is participating in as we look at new opportunities for CANDU supply internationally. Many of these are done in partnership with other international lenders and partners, including, as you mentioned, the Koreans. And that would be a very live example with respect to the Cernavoda refurbishment and new reactors 3 and 4 in Romania. That will be the way of the future, I would add, given the size of these projects. They are, in some cases, multiple tens of billions of dollars to complete. And so we find that partnering with like-minded nations with complementary supply chains and value chains is the way we can deliver the greatest value for Canadians.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Simard for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. There seems to be a persistent misunderstanding in the aluminum sector between the primary producers and the processors. There are high tariffs right now for the primary producers. They're still doing well because they send that tariff to the next person, and it's more expensive in the Midwest, but it's the processors that are having a hard time. In the program that you have, do you make a distinction between the primary producers and the processors?
Donc,
To be eligible, it doesn't matter where you are in the value chain. It's whether or not you are directly impacted by the tariffs. And so, if you are a processor, you export to the United States, and you are impacted by the tariffs, you have access to the program. I don't know how you make those decisions, but I hope that you are aware that the tariffs for a primary aluminum producer, and I know this, they are in my writing, this is an issue, but it's not that puts them at risk. I don't know if they can ask for any kind of support. I don't think that it would make sense to offer financial support to these primary producers because they're not the ones who need it. It's the processors who need it. In Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, for 30 years, we've been trying to have a processing sector. It's very complex with issues in the Midwest. And to see these people losing everything because they are no longer competitive is difficult. I think that you should be focused on them instead of on the primary producers. You said earlier that you've been implementing this for the last 5 weeks. I don't know if this is something that you have thought about. We've been focused on small and medium-sized businesses, so processors are much smaller businesses than the primary producers. We focus on the processors, but also manufacturers who have steel and aluminum, copper, or the exporters, the final exporters. So the eligibility criteria is not whether or not you're a producer or a processor, it's whether or not you're exporting to the United States and if you're directly impacted by the tariffs. I think in that context, processors are eligible and we would support them.
Mr. Grelot, please, for 5 minutes.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente.
Hello, Madam Chair. Ms. Dorval, thank you for being with us. Very happy to have you with us today. I know that you've been working closely with many businesses in my region, the prettiest one in the region, by the way, in Beauce. In your introductory remarks, you talked about the steel and aluminum sectors and how they're impacted by tariffs. You spoke about the $1 billion to support them. Last week, I visited different regions in Quebec, including Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, a company that is losing $500,000 per week. Do you believe that that business would like a loan, or would they like a solution with the United States? It's not my place to examine the potential solutions through different institutions. At the BDC, what we can offer entrepreneurs is loans or advisory services, and that's quite valuable to industries in that sector, or liquidity. So we understand that we're not able to meet all of the needs of entrepreneurs. We have a very specific role to play, and regardless of the economic context, we'll be there to support entrepreneurs with our expertise. When you're in business and you're losing $500,000, the bottom line's not good, and the BDC is not there to support them. Can we agree on that? Can you repeat? The business that's losing all of that money in a week, their bottom line is not going to be very pretty. Are you still going to be there to support them? The entrepreneurs with whom we work, when they're going through difficult times, well, we try to put in place measures in order to support them through the difficult times. Now, whether or not our offer is sufficient, probably not in that case. And the long-term response would be, Mr. Winterholt, President Trump announced that he does not want to move with Sweden. What would be the impact on our Canadian companies?
Yeah, so perhaps you could repeat the question. We lost the introduction just for a moment.
Le président Trump, hier.
President Trump yesterday, that he did not want to renegotiate CUSMA. The interpreter apologizes, she misheard. What would be the impact on Canadian businesses?
Yeah, so maybe as stated earlier this morning, I think the impact would be significant. The U.S. remains our largest market by a considerable measure. I think efforts made at EDC and in other organizations to help diversify away from the U.S. as our sole market helps mitigate that risk, but it will remain our majority customer. And so as a result, I think a healthy trading relationship in North America is key.
Le gouvernement cherche à développer d'autres.
The government is seeking to develop other markets. We all agree with that. But should they focus on large businesses or small and medium-sized businesses?
At EDC has been that it is actually segment agnostic. So businesses of all sizes actually benefit from a diversified approach to international trade. And in effect, we see the greatest opportunity for small and medium-sized exporters to mitigate their risk, in particular in a number of key sectors. One that we don't often talk about a lot in the services sector, where we are already fairly diversified. Only 51% of Canadian service exports go to the United States, tend to be more smaller and medium-sized exporters. Huge opportunity there to have them start internationally in free trade agreement markets and other markets globally.
Fait que là, vous me dites que les PME de la Beauce.
So you're saying that small businesses from La Beauce, Saint-Georges would benefit from an agreement with the United States. That's something that you can confirm?
It's much more around the sector that the company comes from and the opportunity that then ties to the international demand. So I think it's again from the entire country these opportunities are present.
99%.
99% of businesses are small businesses in Canada, and we focus on large businesses because they're the ones with the profits. It's not a PME that's going to be greatly impacted from these negotiations. I think I have about 30 seconds left, Madam Chair. So someone mentioned non-compliance in imports. Do you have a role to play in verifying or supporting them in if there are toxic materials coming into Canada? Do you play a role regarding imports?
We do not.
Merci.
Very much. Madame Lapointe, please, for 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, bienvenue au...
Thank you. Welcome to the witnesses. I'm going to come back to what Mr. Simard was mentioning earlier regarding processors and the aluminum sector. You talked about supporting these viable businesses, and we're currently facing significant instability. It's not these big companies that have needs, it's rather the aluminum processors. And you said processors and manufacturers, and that tariffs were impacting them the most. You talked about viable businesses. What did you mean by that? Because you're going to support them either through loans or... So can you expand on that, please?
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. We seek to support businesses that were defined as being viable before being impacted by the tariffs. So we go back, we look at their results before 2025 to see if they were able to cover their regular load. That's what we mean by a viable business. I have a question now for Mr. Winterholt and Ms. Dorval. The mandates of your different agencies, how do they support the work of the minister, and how do they support government priorities on trade diversification and creating opportunities? Mr. Winterholt, earlier you talked about new markets, emerging markets. We know that they're there. What are these new markets that you are looking into? How do you do that work?
Les deux.
Merci beaucoup. I would start by perhaps noting that when we look at new markets, it really is what we would call non-traditional markets, which means largely outside of North America. And so at EDC in the past 3 years, we've doubled our office network in Asia, as an example. And so the Asia-Pacific region has seen approximately 30% growth in EDC support of Canadian exports in just the last 2 years. And perhaps to tie it back to an earlier question, this is, again, across all segments. So small and medium-sized companies absolutely included in that number, actually are the majority of those companies successfully now exporting into Asia. The next region of real focus for us is Europe, and this is in direct reaction to guidance from the Minister for International Trade to broaden activities in that market. And so EDC will open 3 new representations in Europe this year in 2026 to be on the ground to help additional Canadian companies, exporters, and investors. And we are looking at establishing a fully operational branch to help actually lend and ensure that Canadian companies are successfully supported in achieving the opportunities they have in Europe. Last point would be this is all done in partnership, and so we are very closely linked to our colleagues at BDC. I know you've heard from CCC and Invest in Canada as well, and the Trade Commissioner Service. This works when the Team Canada effect really comes together to allow us to leverage our own unique strengths, and so that's a very important part of the success we'll see going forward.
Oui, j'ajouterais à ça dans le programme.
I would add that in the Pivot to Grow program, it's a program that seeks to support entrepreneurs, especially through our advisory mandate and how changes have impacted them and what their options are in order to overcome those challenges. And that includes exports and what the opportunities are. So again, we have over 600 mandates in the last year, and we are looking at different markets as well and how to support entrepreneurs. We've met with different witnesses and spoke about free trade agreement, and we in Canada are known for our agri-food and food processing. We carried out a study on Africa, and for food processing, there is a way to work together to export more. You talked about services. 51% is our expertise. Can you speak about that market specifically?
To my colleague Joanne in just a moment, I would start by saying agri-food, processed food and beverage are one of the key priority sectors for Export Development Canada. We have only 6. It is an area of already very strong presence internationally and huge opportunity for growth. And perhaps Joanne can talk to a little bit around a specific example that maybe helps illustrate that.
Sure, thank you for the question, and thanks, Todd. Maybe I can speak a little bit about our the work we do on a connections basis, where we introduce Canadian suppliers to international buyers that EDC has a relationship with, and we've seen significant growth in the agri-food space. An example is a Canadian supplier that makes ramen noodles, and they were introduced in 2023 to one of our buyers in Mexico, which was a new market for them. And that opportunity, which started out as, a trial order, turned into $2.6 million in business for that particular company and really helped propel them forward. And now they're exploring opportunities through our additional relationships in Europe as well.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Val, if I can, I'd like to start in your general direction. Your work supports Canadian businesses domestically, if I can use that term. I'm just wondering about an article that I've read respecting a venture capital gap that's been identified. Can you speak to that? Do you understand what that means for customers and clients at BDC?
Yep. And I think my colleague Pierre is best placed to answer that question. He was part of the research group that did the report. So Pierre, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Véronique. We have quite a strong venture capital market in Canada, but it's not as dynamic as it is in other countries in the world. For example, the United States. So especially over the last few years, where there has been a lot of uncertainty. So what we see is the access to equity for startups in Canada has diminished over the last few years just because of the current economic situation. So when there's more uncertainty in the economy, that's typical that the venture capital market will slow down, and that's exactly what we are seeing right now.
I presume then that goes hand in hand with general capital flight from Canada. Foreign direct investment, Royal Bank of Canada released a report about roughly 2 weeks ago. More than $1 trillion in investment left Canada between 2015 and 2024. $2 leaving for every one that came in. I have to believe that that's essentially that the venture capital gap at our small and medium-sized businesses is essentially a reflection of this capital flight.
Well, it's part of it. It's also, we attract foreign investment, and these investments are not always related to the venture capital group. Venture capital is a very specialized, I would say, financing tool, because there's a lot of risk attached to that. The venture capital make reference most of the time to startups, a very young firm. So the issue is, one, the market becomes more uncertain. Well, investors, domestic investors, the Canadian investors, or investors coming from outside the country, but on both cases, they become more cautious. And that's the reason why the venture capital market is slowing down. It's really related to the risk and the appetite, I would say, for the risk.
And I have to believe then that the fact that CUSMA, our North American Free Trade Agreement, is in an unknown state is a direct and major contributor to the uncertainty that you're referring to. Is that correct?
Yes, I will agree with that. I think over the last 12 or 18 months, there's no doubt that what's going on with the imposition of the tariff has created a lot of uncertainty, and this is not helping the venture capital market.
Now, sir, a thing I've read more than once is it's important not to rush into a bad deal. What I'm trying to understand is why we're not working hard to rush into a good deal. I have to believe that the continuing uncertainty related to an annual review of CUSMA is just going to continue to chill the business investment climate. Is that not fair?
Well, you know, it's a bit out of my scope of research, so I won't be able to comment on this one.
Very well. Ms. Dorval, if I can come back to you, I wonder if you have or are able to inform this committee about the information you're getting from your clients and companies that you support on the ground. One of the pieces of information that I've received over the last number of months that really concerns me is that Canadians are presently creating or opening more corporations in the U.S. to do business than they are in Canada. Have you seen that on the ground?
I cannot say that I have seen that they are opening more business in the U.S. than in Canada. I think I will say entrepreneurs are very resilient, and for every challenges they have met in the last 5 years, because there's not only the tariff, there's been COVID, there's been supply chain challenge, there's been inflation. They are quite creative in finding solution. Some of them facing the tariff have found solution at diversifying their market, becoming more productive internally. Some other have decided to open a new place of business in the U.S. I would add that this is not new and has not started with the U.S. tariff. And Pierre, you can maybe add to that. But for an entrepreneur that try and get to a point where they are exporting, opening a place of business in that export country could be a great way to continue to grow. So that's what I've been observing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Val. On to Mr. Lavoie, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. I want to come back to the question that I had asked. Mr. Winterholt, you were not able to respond, so I will give you the time to do so now. Thank you.
We go in three directions to address your question in terms of how we are helping Canadian companies prepare to diversify and face some of these challenges. First, I'll maybe mention a geographic effort. Second would be sector areas. And then third is programming or partnership. And I may call on Joanne here in a moment as well. So further to my earlier comments, we certainly have overinvested in many markets outside of the traditional sphere for Canadian exporters. And at EDC, we have now 13 offices on the ground in Asia, and we're working towards 8 in Europe by the end of this year. That's directly tied to growth in exports that we have supported over the course of the last 2 years. And in the case, again, of Asia, we've seen almost 30% growth. What's interesting is the connection to Canadian companies already on the ground in Asia. So our research shows that over 2,700 Canadian mid-market companies are already invested in and exporting to Asia, and there's real opportunity to help them do more and continue to grow. We look at what's coming in Europe in a variety of new sectors, and I'll transition to that in just a moment. And they're leveraging the CETA trade agreement in a more robust way, I think presents a significant opportunity for Canadian exporters and investors, including in new sectors and segments like defense and security. So like our colleagues at BDC, last year, EDC returned to be able to support Canadian companies in this space. And in one calendar year, we have facilitated approximately $1.6 billion in defense and security exports for over 60 companies, which indicates, I think, the level of opportunity and growth that was present there. Other key sectors where we're also doing things differently, I think to your question initially, would include in critical minerals and supporting the development of critical minerals here at home in Canada for eventual export. That could be through companies like Torngat Metals, which is a rare earths manufacturer, or through support of Nouveau Monde Graphite in Quebec. And so significant investment into the critical minerals space. Finally, I would point to artificial intelligence and digital technologies, and along with our partners here, have invested in Canadian companies like Cohere to help them scale and grow in a way that allows them to take advantage of the international opportunities that are present. Maybe lastly, I'll touch on a couple of programs. We also had a kind of tariff program we put in place, the Trade Impact Program at EDC, now about 16 months in duration. It has delivered about $2.5 billion in incremental support for Canadian exporters and investors through 5,400 transactions, again, mostly for small and medium-sized exporters. And maybe I'll turn it to Joanne just to use an illustration of how some of these small and medium-sized exporters connect to different markets.
Thank you, Todd. I'll share a little story about one of our companies that we work with based out of Montreal. They were introduced to an EPC firm in Turkey that EDC has a very strong relationship with. And through that introduction, they were a small company. We have since supported them in significant growth in that the sales that they've had with this entity was equivalent to $145 million between the two entities. So it really helped propel their growth, and not only in terms of opportunities with this company, but it's allowed them to then do more in other markets and pursue other opportunities.
Vous avez parlé tout à l'heure.
Earlier, you talked about opening offices in Europe, and before I forget, I would like to know if you could send us a document, BDC and EDC. Could you both send us a document? I'm a very visual learner. So before 2025 and now, what has changed? Have you opened any new markets, any new sectors? For example, defense with BDC. I know for some years you weren't there. Are there any sectors that you weren't in before, but you are now, or there are markets abroad that you're now in? So concrete examples where you weren't before, where you are now. Ms. Dorval was saying that you were able to adapt very quickly, and I would like to ask the same question to EDC. How long does it take you? You're not there, you examine the situation, and then you offer support. Is it 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years? That's the kind of information that I would like for you to send to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That would be very valuable information. Mr. Simard, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci. Hey, j'aimerais peut-être...
Thank you. I recently asked one of your colleagues to have information regarding EDC's investments in loans by province, but when we look at the annual report in the 2025 report, if we look at oil and gas, that's $9.3 billion and $2 billion in direct assistance, 7.6 in 2024, $1 billion in support, 7.3 in 2023. So when we look at the different annual reports, we can see support for the oil and gas sector. And the only sector that was not impacted, in my view, in the tariff war is the energy sector. So I wonder if you could give us information that the information regarding support to the forestry sector and the oil and gas sector. What I was given at the Natural Resources Committee was coefficients. Yes, it gives an indication, but it doesn't show us the support per sector. If you focus on the oil and gas during a crisis, when they are not the sector being the most impacted by these tariffs, well, perhaps there's a missed opportunity. So I don't know if you could give us that information by sector, perhaps for 2022 to 2025. That would give us an idea regarding support for the different sectors.
To do that, and maybe in 10 seconds, I can tell you that the support for the oil and gas sector has traditionally declined following the Government of Canada's decision at COP26 to not allow EDC to support international oil and gas. So that number has shrunk. But you're correct, it was $9.3 billion last year. And the majority of that goes to something called electricity trading support. So that is literally the export of electricity from Canada, from Quebec, from other provinces into the United States, as well as support for oil and gas, in this case, mostly gas exports. But happy to provide a more detailed breakdown for the committee.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Simard.
Pétrole et gaz naturel. Dans votre...
Natural oil and gas, that's under oil and gas.
Thank you very
Merci.
much. Mr. Arnold, please, for 5 minutes, followed by Mr. Fonseca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be a sub-in on this committee. I haven't been here before. I want to touch on a couple of points that I've picked up on over the last few weeks here. And one is skills training and then infrastructure requirements here in Canada. Was recently at a presentation regarding marine transportation requirements here in Canada. And it was pointed out that over the next few years, Canada is only going to be able to meet about 40% of the anticipated needs in the shipping sector for heavy tonnage captains, crews, marine pilots, and so on. If this is such a shortage that's been identified by industry, do either of your organizations play a role in that, whether it be developing private training facilities or private-public partnership training facilities, or have any understanding of the drastic shortage that's been identified that we're facing?
So we are conscious of some of the shortage. I wouldn't attach it particularly to that sector, but I think of other trades, like, for example, welding is a big challenge in Canada currently, and there's a lack of a skilled trade. And so we are supporting a number of entrepreneurs that are schools for trades. If I take the broader question that you are talking about in terms of infrastructure related to the marine sector, we're currently going through an exercise of better understanding the defense sector broadly defined here, including marine commercial marine vehicles, to understand where there's significant gap versus the stated objective and the defense industrial strategy, in order to understand where BDC, who's there to support mainly small and medium business, can help develop that part of the value chain. So we're conscious of the challenge. We are mapping it to better understand where there's gap, to then be able to pinpoint our action.
Any further to add, Mr. Winterholt?
Sure, I would add, with EDC's mandate, we really are focused on helping to generate and increase international trade, and so we can support those firms once they're ready to actually export their training program. We would be more connected to the build-out of...
What I'm getting at is, even if those companies are ready to export, the infrastructure and the workforce to be able to do those, make those exports aren't going to be in place. We simply cannot meet those. And I want to point to another example. My riding, Kamloops Shuswap Central Rockies, covers over 400 kilometers of Trans-Canada Highway and about 450 kilometers of CPKC rail mainline. The main transportation corridor for Western Canada to the Port of Vancouver, and not the only one, but certainly the largest one. An order paper question I put in asked what the federal government had invested or spent on planning or engineering for highways improvements through the national parks, which are 100% responsibility of the federal government. And the response for what they had spent over the last 10 years was basically zero, set for a project that had already been underway. So there's been no new projects proposed, or even the design or engineering phase started on projects that are going to take at least 10 years to be done. We see highway closures near my home that once or twice a week because of the poor highway conditions, overspeed of semi-trailers. When these include a fatality, the highway is shut down for 4 to 6 hours, completely closed with no detours available. And it's been estimated that those closures through the Rogers Pass cost the Canadian economy about $3 million per hour. Avalanche control that the government has now said the armed forces are no longer going to take part in that, but they have put no plan in place to replace it. So we're going to see highway closures of unknown lengths at $3 million per hour, killing our economy. So I want to know what your organizations are doing to assist in making sure we have the trades, the business, and the industry ready to build that infrastructure that we need if we're going to be able to export the goods that you're helping entrepreneurs develop.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Maybe you can, next round, get an answer, if you can, to Mr. Arnold, just to keep timing going. Mr. Fonseca, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our officials from BDC, EDC. I'm so glad that you work so well together and you support our exporters and the targets, the goals that we're trying to achieve. So I want to ask you just how important, and it can be answered from EDC and BDC, just how important that whole of government approach is in helping Canadian businesses succeed internationally. And that can be, who would like to answer that?
Sure, I'm happy to begin. Sure. Yep, I would say it's essential. And the way these two organizations work together, I think, is in a fairly seamless way. And we look at where is the priority for each organization. So at EDC, largely mid-market, larger Canadian companies who are looking at taking advantage of international opportunities. I'll let my colleague explain BDC a little bit, but it's a bit of a continuum. And so when you start with BDC support at the smaller end, maybe VC or seed capital, as they get beginning to grow and they start to scale, they then begin to look at really international opportunities. And so keeping a close contact, also with our colleagues at CCC and in the Trade Commissioner Service, absolutely critical so we're not duplicating efforts and we're making sure we each are delivering on our primary mandate.
From a BDC perspective, what we see is help entrepreneurs develop a strong Canadian base and get to a level where they are ready to export. We help them develop strategy on how do they export, where should they export, and we have that handshake and that reference program where when an entrepreneur needs support, specific support related to exportation, where we send them to EDC.
Okay, thank you. So we had a very ambitious goal years ago. It was about doubling our trade with the non-U.S. markets, and we were able to achieve that. Now we've set another ambitious goal, redoubling now that trade over the next 10 years with markets outside of the U.S., be it Europe, Indo-Pacific, high growth markets. And in terms of being able now to hit that next goal, have you built that into your strategic plans? Is that part of your strategic plans, and how will we get there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely is, and we're actually currently in the process of developing our 2026 to 2031 five-year corporate plan that absolutely takes direction from the Minister of International Trade through our Statement of Priorities and Accountabilities to have that as one of the key deliverables for EDC, and that is what then directly ties to our investment in new markets in terms of boots on the ground, new programming to help kind of take on different risk than we maybe have taken in the past in hopes of reaching that target, which I would agree with you is an aspirational one, but one that I think is within the realm of the possible.
So Prime Minister Carney, Minister LeBlanc, Minister Sidhu, they've all spoken to in terms of these goals. We want to increase our foreign direct investment by, $1 trillion over the next 5 years, double our non-U.S. trade over the next 10 years. And the way to do that is what we were doing years ago when we first looked to renew NAFTA, so that as became CUSMA. We did it as a Team Canada approach. That means all levels of government, all parliamentarians, a whole of government approach, and that served us very well. Now, I'll say there are parliamentarians that talk down Canada, that keep talking about the negatives, and how do you think that helps in terms of providing our stakeholders what they need to be able to succeed and to speak to their counterparts?
I think I would address that question by saying what we hear from our exporters, our investors, our customers, is really the need to have all methods of support available to them to be successful. That this is a very competitive environment. It's not only Canada looking for new markets, it's many different nations looking for new markets. And so we will only be successful if we work, I think, together across the tools that are present here. And I would also introduce the opportunity for the Canadian private sector to lean in and be part of that journey. And so at EDC, fully 85% of every transaction we do is done in partnership, both with colleagues like BDC, but also with the Canadian financial institutions, with the Maple 8. So it is really it's an entire country objective to compete in a very dynamic environment.
Yeah, so we're under this existential threat. We understand that we need to be united as a country, united as a government, and I say that as a government in a nonpartisan way. I do feel, and what I'm hearing is we need to, the successes we've had, we could build on those successes, and to undermine those in any way by trying to undermine the government's approach to getting this very important, be it CUSMA trade or other trade deals around the world, would be a negative thing.
I think I would say there's a real opportunity to go further together than separately is how I would answer that question.
Well, thank you.
On to Mr. Chambers, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you,
followed by Mr. Nabke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following my colleague's question about give you an opportunity to answer the question that was asked at the end of the last round. If you have any comments on infrastructure for my colleague.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah. So at EDC, our focus on helping Canada develop its trade-enabling infrastructure is really in those critical projects and parts of the infrastructure backbone, roads, rails, ports, airports, things of that nature that tie directly to exports. So that's our primary mandate and function, and that is something that we continue to support very actively at EDC.
Thank you very much. We heard in your opening testimony, Mr. Winterholt, about EDC's mandate providing insurance, lending, and direct capital to firms. Ms. Dorval, how would you classify BDC's mandate?
Well, our mandate is about supporting entrepreneurs to start, grow, scale, with a focus on the Canadian operation of those business. And ensuring that there's a healthy entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Thank you very much. If your focus is primarily on the Canadian operations, how does the new fund that you've been given to distribute that seems to focus on exports kind of fall squarely within your mandate?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure which fund you are referring to.
Oh, was that not your Pivot to Grow fund?
Oh, I just to re-explain what a Pivot to Grow is about. So Pivot to Grow is a program that helps companies that are affected by tariff or the uncertainty to look at what is the next best step for them. And that's not focused on exportation, but it can include an exportation. So it can include things like relooking at your strategy. Where do you want to be present? What product? What's your operational efficiency? So it can be quite broad, and it could include an aspect around exportation.
Thank you very much. And so that sounds to me a little bit more like consulting services. Is that fair?
So the Pivot to Grow have two aspects. There's an aspect of advisory service, so consultation, and there's an aspect of financing also related to that.
Thank you. And Mr. Winterholt, do you provide consulting services as well?
We do not.
Okay, so that's kind of where there seems to be a bit of a delineation, as I understand. You'll forgive me because there's a bit of sometimes it's unclear about mandate in some of these organizations, and sometimes they seem to overlap from time to time. But it would be entirely conceivable that both organizations would serve the same client. Is that correct?
It's possible we serve the same client. We would serve them on different needs. So BDC will help them start, grow, make a strong Canadian starting point. EDC will help them with the export part of their business.
And do you have a good understanding between the two organizations where you might overlap? Like, have you done relationship mapping between, here's some entities that we frequently deal with, and I'm just trying to get an understanding of how you might operate in the market together.
Yeah, happy to address that one. Absolutely, we do. We have standing meetings and engagements between our teams. There was also a committee put together called the Better Committee that has us and as a number of other Crown corporations on it, where we have open discussions around customer needs, where there are gaps in the market, and how we make sure that we leverage each other's strengths as opposed to duplicate efforts. The one area I would say we do often work together is in the equity space, and EDC is more of a later stage equity provider. So as companies are ready to scale up and take advantage of new opportunities, we could complement existing BDC investment in Canadian companies, for example.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Nabke, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to witnesses. Thank you very much for making yourself available for 2 hours for this very important conversation. My apologies that I wasn't here for the first half of the meeting due to some community events. So I may be asking a few things that you may have answered, but hopefully it will be with a different take, and you'll be able to still give some more information. I think through your presentation, I'm sure my colleagues are more aware of the role of EDC and BDC in terms of how you support Canadian businesses. My colleague, Mr. Fonseca, was talking about the stated mandate for the government to double our non-U.S. exports. I do recognize, and I know that you, as your respective organizations, are really stepping up the plate to help facilitate that for Canadian businesses. Can you give us some specific example? What changes have you made in your operations, in your offerings, in your programs? And if you want to speak to some of the sector specific, I know in defense there's a lot of work going on as well, as to help government meet the mandate and assist businesses to be able to pivot away from the U.S. or add other non-U.S. jurisdictions as export markets as well. Perhaps we'll start with EDC and then BDC. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. And maybe just re-illustrate a couple of quick points there. Absolutely, the pivot to new markets has been something that is fundamental to EDC's current strategic plan and our activities of the last 2 years. So we've invested a great deal of additional resources, human and financial, into the Asian region. We're seeing real growth there, about 30% over the course of the last 2 years, so much that it has now actually achieved a level footing with European export support from EDC. And that's something we had never seen previously. We also do a fair amount of of market intelligence. So from the perspective of our international operations, helping Canadian companies who maybe have only ever exported to the United States understand some of the opportunities that are present outside of the U.S., whether that's in South America, Europe, Asia, as I suggest. And so we do that through a number of webinars, through information products that we're happy to share in partnership with the Trade Commissioner Service, really amplifying their efforts. And in particular, we are looking at a number of really key, fast-developing sectors like defense and security, where EDC support has gone from zero last year to $1.6 billion in just one calendar year. In critical minerals, where we're investing in the development of new mine sites here in Canada to help get them up to scale more quickly and eventually export and help change that storyline. And then through things like artificial intelligence, digital technologies, where we see absolutely incremental growth outside of Canada and the United States, investing in those companies, helping them to scale more quickly, and then to deliver incremental exports.
So I would say that we've done four different things related to that. One, I'm going to go back to Pivot to Grow, because it's really about defining and helping entrepreneurs define how best to adapt to the environment, including exporting. And within that, we have increased our offer and the number of consultants that we have in the sector of exportation. We are helping with specific sectorial programs that are affected by tariff for the exporter. So this is more helping from a liquidity point of view and in adapting to that environment. We've put in place LIFT. LIFT, that is a program to support entrepreneurs invest in AI and in robotization automation to help become even more competitive, more productive, so they can go on the international place and be competitive. And we also are putting more emphasis on some critical sector that will provide opportunity to export, like defense, that is a big platform that has been launched, $6 billion that will be developed around that sector. So 4 things that we're doing.
Can we can you share with us information? Again, I'll start with BDC. What particular markets you are focusing beside the United States, and what steps have you taken? I know in case of EDC, you're opening new offices. So if you can speak to sort of the more tactical approach that you may be deploying to really help Canadian businesses in these in the other markets, whether it's Indo-Pacific, Latin America, et cetera.
Take it.
Sure.
Yeah, happy to start. So it is really about the kind of hands-on approach that helps make the difference. So it is, firstly, the identification of opportunities. My colleague had spoken a little bit earlier around the key partnerships we have with major multinational corporations globally, understanding their supply chain, helping to support their purchase of Canadian goods and equipment, allows us to make connections that otherwise don't happen often with smaller or medium-sized Canadian companies. And so those international networks and the hand-to-hand kind of connections that are made in market and here in Canada, absolutely essential, and establishes presence in a supply chain. And so we had given an earlier example where we had helped a Montreal manufacturer get into a Turkish EPC company, and they actually took advantage of that relationship to land a multi-million-dollar opportunity in North Africa. So it is about relationships and introducing those kind of tangible opportunities to each other.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Simard for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to come back to a question that was posed by Mr. Chambers regarding advisory services that you offer. There was that 25% on finished product that contains aluminum. There are small businesses that are not used to dealing with something like that, and so they had to pay for services that were $300 an hour, and that represents considerable cost for them. Perhaps that's information that you have that you could share with them. Is this a service that you offer, and could those people have access to it? It's Alu Québec who did that work in my riding in order to inform people. They received a lot of calls from people who wanted to better understand the tariffs and what the 25% applied to. Is it part of your role to offer that kind of information given the current context? Thank you for the question. Our role is less about informing a specific sector, but we want to support entrepreneurs. And I'll come back to our program, Pivot to Grow. We are aware that entrepreneurs are sometimes limited, and so we have preferential tariffs of rates of 75% so that they can more easily access our advisory services. We also offer what is called, or rather it's a rapid service, 4 hours with an expert, and it includes explaining the tariffs that impact a business. And at the end of that 4 hours, there's a one-page summary that includes specific recommendations. In that case, we can support entrepreneurs that way, either in making services affordable for them and offering them a very specific service to meet their needs. Thank you. I don't have a lot of time left. Mr. Winterholt, we talked about support for the oil and gas sector and how that's going down. I quoted the years 2022 to 2025, but in what was asked of you, could you also share that data? It would be interesting to see how that went down. We want to see which industries were supported in this tariff crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this round, 5 minutes? Yes. Thank you. I wanted to ask Ms. Dorval about, did I understand correctly that earlier you said approximately 7% of BDC clients are currently exporters?
That's right.
Are you taking active efforts now to increase that number, and what exactly does that look like? You've touched on some of the things, I think, already today, but I wonder if you could expand on that.
Yeah. So our mandate is not focused on the export. Again, we have a complementary mandate to EDC related to that. But our mandate is to ensure that the Canadian company are strong and healthy. So all the action that we have taken and that I mentioned earlier is about thinking from a strategic point of view, does it make sense for them to export and where? And is that making it a more healthy company? How to become more efficient, productive, and focus on some sector specific that we know have the potential to export. But our mandate is not about supporting them with the export part, but making sure that they are strong and healthy and they have the support for that.
Understood. I'm not sure if EDC has anything to add on that specifically.
Only that it is essential to work together and see it as a bit of a continuum again. So, as companies scale and get ready to take advantage of international opportunities, that the conversation is a live one, and we're able to kind of refer each direction.
I'm looking at some data from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in their business data lab specifically. Their report title here is Diversification Will Require a Broader Export Base. And I'm wondering if you can assist us in sort of understanding where that 7%, does that tend to be fairly concentrated in specific industries? There's also some question about urban concentration versus smaller enterprises in smaller locations, geographic locations in Canada. Trying to understand how it is that we're going to get to the very ambitious goal that our federal government is currently pursuing, respecting exports.
So, Pierre, maybe you can provide a perspective on that. Our base of about 7% of entrepreneur is slightly below Canadian average that I think is more around 10% of company that are exporting, which makes sense given that we are generally a smaller company. And Pierre, if you want to comment by sector and geographical dispersion.
Yes. Actually, our clients who are exporting, they are present in many sectors of the economy. It's more about the size sometimes, the ability to do that, but also the leadership of the entrepreneur. Some entrepreneurs are more interested to expand to outside Canada than others. In terms of a region, actually, there's a lot of exporters who are not in big cities because a lot of exporters are in the manufacturing sector, and typically these businesses are in the smaller area because that's where the location of a lot of manufacturing is. So we find a lot of our clients in more smaller communities exporting to outside Canada.
Thank you very much. I wonder if you could comment on again, I mentioned earlier the goal of doubling Canada's non-U.S. exports in 10 years. From a BDC perspective, do you see a pathway? And what does that look like? Where are we going to get that kind of growth?
Pierre, do you want to answer that?
Yes, I think there's a lot of opportunities. The world is much bigger now than in the past. So what I find is important is typically our businesses are small in Canada. Now we have an opportunity. There's a lot of business transition right now because we have an aging entrepreneur population. So there's a lot of opportunities to scale up because often you need a certain size to be able to export. And I see a lot of potential right now as businesses tend to become a little bit bigger. They will have more capacity to be able to export. And like Véronique said, one of the role of BDC is to really help Canadian businesses to be stronger. So we help them to grow. And when they grow, at one point, they want to explore markets outside the country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lavoie, for 5 minutes, please, followed by Mr. Simard and Madame Lapointe, and then that's the end of the time that we'll have. So we have 15 minutes remaining, and we'll split the 15 that way. So, Mr. Lavoie.
Oui, merci. Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I wasn't expecting to have more time, but I'm happy to have the floor again. If we come back to what we were saying earlier, do you have any concrete examples? You're perhaps not 50 feet up in the air, 50,000 feet up in the air, perhaps 10,000, but I know that Ms. DeFranco gave us an anecdote, but can you give another example? You talked about businesses, but perhaps a specific example and a before and after. Is there anything that you are doing now that you weren't doing before?
Peut-être que je peux vous donner.
Perhaps I could give you an example, a concrete example, of a business that I met with yesterday in Manitoba. So they are in the steel industry. Steel is facing tariffs. BDC is supporting that business and helping it because it is facing difficulties because of the tariffs and helping it to reposition itself in the country and to focus on defense. We want to support businesses in exploring opportunities in defense. So this business builds equipment and different pieces, aluminum pieces, or rather steel pieces. This business will be supported and we will help them access the defense supply chain. So it helps a business impacted by these tariffs to reposition within a different market. They're not in defense now, but we firmly believe that in supporting them, perhaps with funding, we'll be able to help them explore this new opportunity. But if I understood correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, for the BDC, you were not always in the defense sector. So businesses who had clients in the defense sector, you weren't necessarily funding them then, but you are now? Yes. Defense was not something that we were systematically covering before. What brought about that change? Is it because of the government? Did it come from the department or the government that said, here's a new mandate and you have to follow it? Or is it something that came from your own initiative? Is it a bit of both? And are there any sectors that you say, well, we want to go towards those sectors, even if it's not a directive from the government? As an organization, we are always paying attention to what entrepreneurs need and what's happening in the markets. This move to defense is something that was initiated by BDC, and we worked with our shareholder to ensure an alignment. The situation that we were in required having a more solid and sovereign defense sector. And as the development bank, we saw the important role that we had to play in that sector. And last question, before moving on to Mr. Winterhalt. If the government hadn't brought about that change, would you have? We are able to do that without the government. Same thing for Mr. Winterhalt.
Yeah, I think I would go. I'd start at defense and security, where we did receive instruction from our shareholder, the Minister of International Trade, to reopen our support of the industry. And as I mentioned earlier, that has in only a year led to over $1.6 billion in support for Canadian defense and security exports. That is a very significant and I think quite rapid change. I'd also touch on our support for critical minerals, and we talked a little bit around investment in domestic mine sites. What's very different there, and this is an EDC initiative, is to do it what's called pre-FID or final investment decision. So much earlier in the process to provide EDC equity or financial support to help get those projects over the finish line and start production much earlier. That's a brand new space for us, and we see a lot of potential growth there. And then maybe the last example I would give is EDC participated in the investment of and financing of a spaceport in Atlantic Canada, the first ever that Canada will have. And so this is, again, tied a little bit to defense and security, where we see a lot of opportunity for not only kind of space-related technologies and investment, but also defense and security adjacent. And so these are three simple examples of where we've seen new growth in a year.
Merci. Je vois que mon temps est écoulé, mais merci de votre présence.
Thank you. My time is up, but thank you for being with us today. Your role is very important, and I will be awaiting those examples. And it would be great to see you in 6 months or a year and to see how things have evolved and see how you support businesses. Thank you.
Mr. Samar for 4 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, mes amis.
Thank you, and thank you to my conservative colleagues who have given me a bit more time. I would like to come back to the forestry sector. The crisis has been happening since 2017. It was $13 billion that belongs to the forestry sector, and there was the whole issue with the anti-dumping laws and other measures. Were you consulted by the government in any way following the announcement made at the beginning of this month regarding the task force? I'm not sure what it's called in French. There was a report that was tabled by the task force, the government task force, and it proposed $10 billion over 10 years. I think that this is something that you should have been consulted on. Were you consulted by the government or by the task force? Did you speak to those groups? I cannot speak to that task force specifically. We are in discussions with the government, who is our shareholder, regarding support that we can offer this sector. But I can't say specifically for that task force. Was there anything that you would like to add? No. Did you see the proposal or see a proposal from the forestry sector regarding anti-dumping laws and how, and rather there was a proposal that the government could offer more liquidity? People came to a compromise and said, well, at the end of each month, the government, through EDC, could verify that makes 50% for the anti-dumping rights and countervailing duties. And eventually those funds would be recuperated. Have you been informed of that proposal that came from the different sectors and from unions? Are you aware of it?
Ça vous dit absolument rien?
No.
Ah, ben ça me ferait plaisir.
Well, I'd be pleased to share that information with you. I have a suggestion as well, and I'm eager to see how that's going to develop. When a forestry company asks for support from the government, they're automatically referred to global affairs. And if we support processors, it would be going against our trade agreements. And I saw cases like that in my riding. These businesses that don't have any markets in the United States, it's a domestic market, and yet they're not receiving any support by the federal government because they say that it would be going against their trade agreements, even if they are not having any dealings with the United States. Are you aware of this situation? And before this year or last year, have you seen a forestry business ask for support, and have you had to go through global affairs? In our case, if an entrepreneur asks for financial support, or we don't go through that process, we'll assess the funding request based on financial information, the projects.
Sorry, the time has run out. Madame Lapointe for 4 minutes, and that will be the end of the meeting.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. J'aurais une question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Ms. Dorval. Earlier, you referred to defense. In the Laurentians, we hosted an activity on defense, and that was on March 31st. And we worked with Connexion Laurentide. They organize activities. And we were told that the BDC supported businesses in getting into defense procurement. Is that the information that you currently have? Having certification, because getting into the defense sector requires going through a specific process. That's a good question. Perhaps in order to explain our role, I would come back to our advisory services because they are important for the defense sector. We help entrepreneurs in adjacent sectors to understand what would be required in order to get into the defense sector. There are requirements regarding quality, cybersecurity, and so we're going to support entrepreneurs who are interested in that sector in understanding the requirements. That said, we're not going to open the door for their procurement. We can help them with their business model, but they don't go through us for the validation process to access the defense sector. I met with Ms. Udon, the director, because for a business to get into the procurement process for defense, it's a long process, but through your support, it might take them a little bit less time. Well, we help them understand the requirements. I've met with a few entrepreneurs in the past months. They're seeing these economic opportunities and they're very interested in the sector. We then try to help them understand what's required so that they can be ready to be providers in the defense sector, but we don't have a validation process. You would agree with me then that defense is quite vast. It's not only drones. There's a whole supply chain. Yes, in the Laurentians, there's a lot of focus on aviation, but there are businesses that focus on other things. I went to visit Bain-Mager. I don't know if that's a business that you've supported, but they are in the United States and in my riding. If we speak about military bases, they are going to need significant renovation. And there are businesses who might not know it. They could come into the defense sector and help with the renovation. Entrepreneurs don't know that. They think that it's all military, drones. But is this something that you give them information on? Well, we are more and more familiar with this sector. A large part of the defense sector is supported by businesses where only 10 to 20% of well, I've met with companies that make bunk beds, for example, and so the sector is quite vast. We can look at adjacent industries in order to inform entrepreneurs regarding opportunities in extending their services and their products to the defense sector. So you tell them that there are other options. Yes.
Thank you so much to our witnesses. It's been a very valuable 2 hours. Please ensure that you send the information to the clerk for distribution to the committee members for all of the questions that were outstanding. So thank you all very much. Move adjournment.